The Lifestyle Show, presented by Selina MacKenzie.
We're going to be talking to Jill Norman about her book called The English Table, Our Food Through the Ages. Welcome to the show, Jill.
Hello, Steph. It's very good to be here. Thank you.
Now, I know that you've written many cookery books and that you're a bit of an expert on herbs and spices. So is this a different one? Is this more of a history book?
Yeah, this is absolutely a history book. It was quite a challenge to do it because, as you know from the things I've written and books I've published in the past, they were all strictly a sort of hands-on how-to do cooking, do whatever. So it was a challenge, but and I hesitated a long time before saying I would have a go because it's something that I had to do a lot of research on, a lot of reading, but I enjoyed it and learned a huge amount myself, and also managed to put a few recipes of the period at the end of each chapter so that you could also trace the practical elements of what I was writing about.
And how far back do you go, Jill?
Oh, I mean, I think I start with, earliest occupants of these islands, or anywhere really, when people first started to put down roots and start cooking, and very simple cooking pots over an open fire, that kind of thing.
So were recipes back then written sort of on scrolls?
Well, they would have been written on scrolls, yes. But the very earliest things, I don't think were written down at all. People just ate whatever they could get, as far as one can tell.
And I've got down here, you mention a 14th century form of curry, but curry is spelt C-U-R-Y. Is it curry as we know curry with two R's?
No, it means cooking.
I see. I understand. Yeah,
that is from a very old scroll in the British Library, and it is about cooking. I mean, it is recipes. I mean, it's instructions rather than recipes, and I think it was probably written by a master cook at the court for his apprentices.
Blimey. And is that how you did most of your research, through places like the library?
Yes, the library. And I was fortunate enough, I still am fortunate enough, that my husband was an antiquarian bookseller. And so he bought food books for me whenever they were affordable and he saw them. And his colleagues and friends who often came to stay from abroad brought things too. So I was very lucky to have a collection of books to dip into. Otherwise, this book could never have happened.
Oh, how wonderful. And did you notice that diets and cuisine had changed over the varying periods?
Yes. I mean, when we talk about any kind of food beyond the very basic, we're essentially always talking about the food of the rich, and eventually in later centuries the middle classes too. But the poor just ate what they could lay their hands on, and it was mostly whatever vegetables they could grow on their plots of land, and if they managed to catch a rabbit without being, or something like that, without being caught by the landowner.
Yeah, but there was a lot of poaching going on back then.
There most certainly was.
And can you give us some examples of some really old recipes?
Well, the form of curry is one that you've mentioned. There are, and that's a scroll, as I said, with more than one recipe. But later on, there are books written by the 18th century, or the late 17th century, by women to teach their, first of all, their own kitchen staff how to cook, and later, to a wider audience. But there are many dishes that are associated with different times. They're not necessarily so different from things that, I'm not talking about fast food here, but things that have evolved to be, standard English recipes now. And many of them date back a very long time. They're mostly, but not exclusively, fairly straightforward. They're often things like stews based on meat and vegetables. And there would be occasionally things about fish. Fish was more tricky unless you happen to have a carp pond in your garden or something like that, if you were very rich and you could, get your chef to cook you a carp. But otherwise, fish was strictly for people who lived on the coast for a very long time, until it became possible to transport fish inland much more quickly than had been done in earlier years.
Yeah, I suppose it was whatever you could get your hands on, wasn't it? I mean, they didn't have supermarkets like we have now.
Oh, no. It was whatever you could get your hands on. Of course, markets started quite early, certainly by the 17th century. There were markets often in quite small towns that the local farmers would bring in their produce once a week or once every 2 weeks, something like that, to sell. And there were markets established in London too, and other big cities. And in some places, in the north of England, the produce was actually shipped by canal to the cities, like Manchester, so that it would arrive there as fresh as possible. But it was, transport was slow. And in much earlier years, animals had to walk to the cities to be slaughtered. There's quite a lot of evidence about, cows coming from Suffolk, Norfolk, and even from quite a long way up north, to the markets in London, to the slaughterhouses.
And you mentioned women earlier. Was it mainly women who did the cooking at the English table and the recipes that you found, or was it 50-50 with men?
It was a mixture. For a long, long time, it was the men who did the cooking, and the men who wrote the books in the 16th, 17th centuries. It was the men who dominated, and they, of course, in a grand house, and they were invariably in grand houses, would have had a staff who in the kitchen, and from the lowliest jobs of peeling the veg to actually doing the cooking, and they would have been boys and younger men who were learning how to work in a kitchen.
And do you bring us right up to date? Obviously, it goes back through the centuries, but do you include some modern classics in there?
Yes, yeah, I've tried to. I don't think I get much further than the 70s.
Right.
I thought, well, it's I'd better stop and be able to finish this off. But the 20th century is in there all right, and there's starts to be mention of fast food and worrying things like people not learning how to cook properly, and difficulties that people have sometimes in making their own food.
And what's next for you, Jill? Because I mentioned you are an expert on herbs and spices. What's the next book you plan to write?
I don't have one.
No time. You probably just need a rest now, do you?
I need a rest. And I'm not sure that I'm ready to embark on another book for a while. The research takes such a long time. And I'm having time off right now.
Good for you. You enjoy this one because I believe it is just out today. I've got 4th of November.
That's correct. It is publication day today.
Congratulations. Well, we're selling it on our website right now, TRE.radio. For our listeners, it's called The English Table, Our Food Through the Ages, and it's by Jill Norman, who we're chatting to now. If people want to find out more about you, Jill, do you have your own website?
I do have a website. It's being shifted from one base or whatever you call it to another right now, but in the next few days it will all be up and running again. And I still have a bit to add about this book, but it gives you some sense of what I've done in the past. It's just happens to be a bad patch while my provider for the website is migrating it to some other system.
I understand. I guess if people just put in your name, Jill Norman, then they can find it and it'll come up.
It's jillnorman.com. Yeah.
Great stuff. Well, it's been lovely to chat to you. Thank you for joining us, Jill.
Steph, it's been a great pleasure to talk. And thank you so much for inviting me.
You're welcome. You take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.